Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's BIC event, Over the Top Rules for Digital Media. For those who are joining, who have made the trip and have very kindly joined us in the auditorium, we request you to keep your masks on through the session in interest of health and safety. And of course, everybody seated. This is just to reassure everybody who's watching it later on YouTube that everybody is safely distanced. And so the center recently notified Information Technology Rules 2021 to regulate digital content. These rules mandate online media as well as OTT platforms to follow the existing content codes meant for television and print media, and to set up a 3-tier grievance redressal structure to look at any violation of the rules. The new rules also empower the INB secretary to direct blocking of public access to specific content in case of an emergency. Critics of the new regulations have pointed out that these rules threaten the end-to-end encryption of messaging platforms and impose onerous compliance requirements on the online media platforms. The panelists with us today, Harish Narsappa, co-founder of Daksh, Ragamalika Karthikeyan, editor at the News Minute, Prakash Belawadi, theatre practitioner, and Sudhir Krishnaswamy, Vice Chancellor NLSIU Bangalore, will discuss the need for and the nature of these regulations. And with that, over to you, Harish.
Thank you, Lekha. Welcome everyone to what I hope will be an unraveling of the various discussions, whether criticism or otherwise, that have been flooded in the media about these OTT regulations. It's quite a complex topic if we look at the purpose behind it, the content of the regulations, and the the perception that it is also linked to certain ideological decisions being made in terms of whether it is whether it seeks to curtail certain freedoms alone. But what I would like to take 2 minutes just to give a context. As lawyers, and both Sudhir and I are lawyers, we have seen this debate about regulating newer forms of communication every time there is a revolution in the manner or the mode of sharing information. Right? When the print media started, when publishing started about 100 years ago, or before that, or publishing became popular about 100 years ago, we had similar debates about the power of the state to regulate publications, the power of the state to regulate ideas, and the spread of ideas. And there's a difference between the power of the state to regulate ideas and the spread of ideas. And what regulations about 100 years ago sought to do was whether in terms of liability of the person who is publishing, the liability of the person who is selling the book published or the magazine published, and the liability of the person who writes a certain content. So this is not a new debate in that sense. That is the power of the state to regulate ideas, the power of the state to regulate the spread of ideas, and to what extent they should go. That is not a new debate. What is novel this time around is the democratization of the creation of content and the ability to spread news. Neither in this time around, with the kind of media, with the kind of tools available to spread information or content, because we are talking about two things here, right? While the rules are much wider, we will, at least I would like my the panelists to focus on two things here today. One is on the news content, and the second is in terms of the artistic creations, and whether it's movies, whether it's shows that are available either exclusively on online platforms or also shown on online platforms. Now, both these things we should remember, whether it's digital news medias or shows available on OTT platforms, are actually created by professionals. But there's also a third aspect. The third aspect is news, which is not really curated by anyone, right? You don't have newspapers curating news, or you don't have serious digital media outlets creating news. It is just news that spreads. Anyone can see something happening on the street, or anyone can see something, for example, if somebody in the audience today looks at this event, records it and shares it, then that is a democratization of sharing information, which is different from a curated content like a newspaper or a news media or a serious theater group creating content. And the regulation, while there is certain distinctions between these three, but the effort that seems to be in the government's mind is to balance two things. One, how to ensure that individuals' rights are protected, and to address the complaints against certain kind of content being created and propagated, and to see whether how do you ensure that the freedom to create content and the freedom to share news remains. So with that introduction, and to sort of point out that while the debate is old, the methodology of the debate has changed, or the nature of the debate has slightly changed because of the reach of the media that we are talking, reach of the tools that we are talking about today, and the democratization in terms of content creation. So I will, with that introduction, let me, so first ask each of the panelists maybe to, say in two or three sort of ideas, not lines or sentences, but in two or three ideas about what they feel about these OTT regulations that have come. Looking at three things. One, the need for it in the larger societal context. Two, because there are some genuine concerns about some kind of content that is being spread, either fake news or nudity, not in terms of content creation, but just taking somebody else's nude photograph, and sending it across to anyone and everyone, things like that. So that both in terms of content, in terms of freedom of speech, and whether this kind of regulation actually affects freedom of speech. And third, can this content be delinked from the wider concerns that have been raised about whether the environment in this country is moving from a sort of an open freedom of speech kind of society to a more regulated freedom of speech society. And I want to point this out again. This is not in terms of whether a particular party is in power or not, because as, again, students of law, I can tell you that the freedom of speech is a very, very delicate freedom for the citizens, irrespective of which party is in power. And there are instances of this, since 1950. So having said that, if you can, look at these three aspects, and of course, any other thing that I may have missed, what I will do is I will come to Sudhir last, because, he's the expert, being the lawyer. But so first I will go to Ragamalika, and then the Prakash, and then Sudhir. Ragamalika, over to you.
Thanks, Harish, and thank you for this event. So I think the important thing, you said a couple of ideas that we need to touch upon, right? So one thing is censorship, as you rightly pointed out. Second thing is creative ways of bringing in new laws. So if you look at sort of the entities that are covered under these rules, it's OTT platforms, social media intermediaries, and then digital news organizations, right? So it's a wide gamut of organizations that you're trying to bring in under one set of rules. So that is problematic, according to me. And another thing to notice over here, of course, is that if you look at either print or television in India, they have laws, of course, beyond Article 19 of the Constitution that regulate them, and those are laws made in Parliament. And suddenly now we have the government trying to sort of bring in some rules that were not even taken to the Parliament, right? They were not debated by our representatives. Nothing of that sort was done. So creative ways of sort of regulating media, if you will. And those are the two big themes that I see over here. And the third thing, of course, is the different sort of levels of steps of, bodies that they want to create for regulating content and stuff like that. And one word for it, as a person who belongs to a small digital news publisher, is expensive. That's what they want to make it. So, yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Prakash?
Thanks, Harish. At the outset, I would like to say that some of you would know that I'm seen as a supporter of the Modi government. I would like to say that first. I'm quite happy to own that, but my position on these rules is that I'm against government creating any new framework to control the production and distribution of content. And I'm happy to take that position of whoever is against the government, the Modi government, because it's a very powerful government and it's in the nature of power to gather more power. So it's correct if all of you feel like opposing it, but I think you should take, in my opinion, a more honest position and oppose existing controls that are there on media. Let me give you 2 or 3 examples first, because I'm a practitioner. I have no theoretical position on this. When the Siddaramaiah government was here, it banned 2 books, 2 Kannada publications, 2 novels. One was actually something about Valmiki. And I remember that in the assembly, the demand was that all the copies of that book should be gathered and burned along with the author. That was the demand. And the book got banned. And there was a second work from a theater person, Yogesh Master's book on Ganesh. Some people took offense that, the deity was offensive to the deity, and there was a demand to ban it. And the book got banned. Now remember the outrage that happened when on the issue of some idea of threat to a publisher, whether the government issued the threat or any what you call henchman of the government did it, that publisher pulped or shredded those copies of the Hindus, correct? Wendy Doniger's. And there was nationwide outrage. But after that, Wendy Doniger's book went on to be featured in the top 10 of New York Times for a long time. But if you ban a Kannada book in Karnataka, that's the end of the author. And as far as I remember, the only person apart from me, I used to write a column then in a local paper, was Dr. Anant Murthy. He said, you can't do these bans. Nobody else seem to be outraged with that. Let me give you a current instance. I've done a play in Mysore. I've adapted S.L. Bhairappa's epic novel, Parva, into a performance. I've done. There was a seminar as a lead up to the play on the 21st of Feb. And this is what Bhairappa said. He spoke in Kannada, so I'm giving you a translation, but this is what he said. He said, see, I have imagined what the characters were thinking, and that forms 80% of the novel. 20% of what is there is actually what is there in the Mahabharata. But what I have developed is what goes on in their minds. And he gave an example. This was the example. You know, Jayadratha kidnaps Draupadi when he sees her, I think during the Virat Parva, and he takes her away. But Bhima hears of it, and Bhima chases him down, ties up Jayadratha, releases her, and brings Jayadratha and throws him at the feet of Yudhishthira and says, "Brother, what should we do to this man who had bad intentions about our wife?" And Dharmaraja says, "We can't do this. He's related to us. Their families will feel very bad. Release him." Bhima is outraged, but Arjuna supports him. And he is released. And this is the question Bhairappa asked. He used the word rape, however, when he spoke. So he said, imagine what Draupadi must have felt, that this man has taken her away. He could have taken her away only for one purpose. And this husband, in some imagined idea of being ethical, is willing to let me suffer this. And he feels that that man does not need any punishment. And I thought what she felt, and I wrote what she felt. That is how I wrote about each character. This is what he said. In return, some community people in Bangalore have filed police cases in 2 stations here. And the 2 police stations have summoned Dr. Bhairappa, who is 91 years old, to appear in the police station. He is very disturbed. I mean, I met him. I'm saying you have laws like this. I mean, if you think freedom of speech is okay, you know, Bhairappa's Parva, by the way, is super supportive of all the women characters of the Mahabharata. You know, he's like, if you watch the play, he's so angry and he uses the women to express his anger with an unjust system. And this is such a perverted idea of delivering justice. If you don't feel outraged by that, then I feel it is, if you think it is okay to have that, this is not so big, I think.
Sudhir? I'll come back to some of those points, Prakash.
So it's a good place to start. I think that the Supreme Court is trying to figure out some ways of getting judges to talk about rape in disciplined ways. And apparently that's very difficult too in our society. So I'm not surprised that that Parva draws this kind of response. I take your point broadly to be that there's a very weak constituency for free speech in India generally, and that's where I'd like to start, which is that, and I think Harish cautioned us that let's not take too linear a view about free speech evolution in India. It's fair to say that in the 1950s and the 1960s, India had one of the most regimented media regimes in the world, right? So we drew more from control regimes like Iran and from heavily regulated, state-regulated, media structures across the board for films, for the written word, for news publishing. We controlled everything. We controlled newsprint. We controlled how it was distributed. We required all newspapers to register. So India was no free speech heaven. And I don't think that anyone should come to this conversation with the premise that we were once great and then we have fallen or some such thing. I guess the point might be put differently, that in the 90s, the internet came to India in a sort of fit of absent-mindedness. And there was a view, at least in political and bureaucratic spaces. It was in some ways, and the more I think about it now, and dare I say, as we grow older, I think we have to look at the 90s as India's glasnost. There's something happened there in the 90s. It wasn't just about the opening up of an economy. It was about the opening up of the mind, which occurred because of a range of factors, some technological, some fiscal, and some political. And we must give credit where it's due. But the internet entered India against a background legal regime that was highly constricted. And then suddenly we had one medium that we thought was either technologically not capable of regulation or not to be regulated. Somehow there's a fresh idea there that maybe we can just let a media run and nothing great happens, at least in a negative sense. And I suppose that 30 years on, we are having a very serious rethink. And essentially what seems to be occurring is a very, very express clawing back of media freedoms to the default mode, which is the old 50s, 60s mode. We have done this before. We have done this with newspapers. We have done this with film. Some bureaucrat sitting in an office somewhere knows best. They will certify, they will regulate before content is published. And they will, when they think fit, take down content wherever the media is. That's our old model. And these regulations claw back in that direction. Now, I think the interesting question, both historically and legally, to ask is what happened in the 1990s? How is it that, that small wave of California-style libertarianism just crept through? How did it come into a regime like the Indian legal regime? How did it find a space here? How did it survive for 30 years? These are interesting questions. If Harish, if you let me, can I just talk about the rules for
that
2 minutes?
My next question and to you. So
okay.
Please go on.
So let me just stay with the rules, because I know this is a bulky set of rules. It's meant to replace many other rules. So yes. I'm not for a moment going to pretend like this can be a detailed legal discussion of the rules, but I think some broad outlines are useful. The rules try to do many things. Rang Malika has already hinted at that. They are very interested in this character called the intermediary, which in internet law got a free pass. There was this idea in the 90s that intermediaries are simply pass-through vehicles. They're just, we borrowed from two broad ideas in pre-existing law. We treated them as common carriers, like a bus, a public bus on the road. The bus gets the license, but the bus can't distinguish who it carries. So we treated internet intermediaries like that, as public carriers. And we also treated internet intermediaries as not having any obligations with respect to content. That was the upshot. Don't control content and you don't take liability. And so that idea has come under pressure. And to be fair, it's not only an Indian pressure, it's under pressure in Europe. Less said about China, the better. The US as well is having very serious debate about whether internet intermediaries should be allowed to just about run content any which way. And these rules clearly shift the boundaries. They take the view that internet intermediaries must take some due diligence steps. And the due diligence steps, as Rang Malika has already suggested, are costly. Let's be clear about this. This is costly to do. It's essentially say goodbye to the old internet. You're not going to get too many new entrants into this space. Old players will dominate. We'll see it. I mean, you can try and imagine that the long story here is that the internet will begin to resemble other media formats. Heavy investment, market entry will be difficult. The obligations that be carried will be significant, and we'll have to wait and watch how this evolves. But let me say two more parts, and I'll stop at least for this round, is that internet intermediaries are given some obligations, and then there is social media intermediaries are given some more obligations, and significant social media intermediaries are given a third layer of obligations. Why this layering? I mean, I guess this could be seen as a form of graded regulation. The bigger players need to regulate more. That could be a benign view of the tiering model. but there could be other views about what's going on here. The second category is online digital media, and we've just spoken about that. And that's broadly the OTT platforms, anyone applying content over the web. And it's so broad that it would include BIC tonight, right? This content would be covered, and BIC would have to discharge all these obligations, which include some prior obligations before you broadcast, which I doubt BIC has today, but it's a sign of things to come. That kind of openness that anyone can get on the platform, say what you want, and get out. And even if you have a small cottage shop putting out content every week, that this is all right, that's over. So now you have to play by different rules. And the third category is news. Now, why did news suddenly come into this frame, and why couldn't news media just carry the internet intermediary obligations and just leave it at that? That was the prior position. But in this set of rules, news media are going to carry new obligations. And once again, without plowing to the details of the obligations, the message is clear. News media on the internet will carry obligations that resemble news media elsewhere. To adopt those modes and deliver to those standards. Now, some people in the room may say that's great. News media on the internet has been running amok. Incidentally, false information, misinformation is not in the rules. It's not there. So if you think that was the problem, disinformation or misinformation was, that's not there. Apparently, there's some other problem that we're trying to contain. And what we want to do is to put our finger on what is this other problem. If it's not disinformation in the news space, what is this other problem that we should be aiming at? So let me stop there. And that's the broad outline of how the rules are set up at this point.
Sudhir, I want to come back to you with one question before we move to Ragamalika. I think one, you did talk about, Ragamalika also mentioned about, this three-tiered, sort of monitoring system. And I want to sort of link, you have the, your own grievance redressal mechanism. So each intermediary needs to have their own grievance redressal mechanism. That's the first tier. Second tier is a self-regulatory body with a retired High Court judge or a Supreme Court judge. And then there are a couple of other categories added, who will then be like an independent regulator. But then there's a third layer, which is essentially the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which can decide to take down something without even giving notice to the intermediary or the website or the blog, whatever it is, by recording reasons. This is what it is. So two things I want to ask you, Sudhir, from a constitutional law perspective. One is, to me, clearly, at least this aspect should have come through a legislation rather than through rulemaking. That's the first point. Your views on that, because that's one of the things that Ragamalika alluded to.
I think you should say, tell me your other points, because I might give me some thinking time.
Only two questions. Right? The second question is, now, isn't this going beyond what the traditional media currently has in terms of regulation? Because it essentially gives somebody in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting the right to decide that some content needs to come down.
So I suspected you were going there, which is why I thought that I'll get that out. And I think both are important questions. This, as you know, it's already in court.
Yes.
And one of the reasons is that, is this even allowed by the Information Technology Act of 2000? I mean, is it even delegated power in rulemaking terms? And I think there are at least certain parts that seem a bit of a stretch. The oversight mechanism, is that particularly a stretch? I'm not sure, but I think it has a different problem. But can you, when a statute defines a certain range of entities, can you go on and change those definitions, expand them, constrict them, divide them? That's not clear. And that's what these rules have done. Internet intermediaries intermediaries are defined in 2M of the Act. But there's a lot else going here that goes way beyond intermediaries. Now, these kinds of questions courts are quite sensitive to, which is that you can't allow a bureaucratic department to change a statute. So I think those questions will be, and they're seen as narrow legal questions, but they're also constitutional questions that all of us should be interested in. But the second question is equally important because, and I'll just track back a little bit and say a little bit about one case. To be sure, there are all sorts of regulatory bodies in regulating all kinds of media. We have many committees sitting, and Prakash has already complained about some work, some don't work. There are official means of regulating speech, unofficial means of regulating speech. But we know that at least with respect to other media, there are a fair few authorities already in place. Is there something egregiously wrong with this oversight committee? And oversight, what did they call it? Oversight mechanism, level 3. In Shreyas Singhal, which is an important case on the internet, the court took an interesting view. It took the view that certain kinds of decision-making must be judicial in character. It can't be executive decision-making. And there's a sliver of a hope for those who think that the internet can be a different medium, that that's a good decision. That don't give a broad swathe of executive power over this medium of communication. Now, clearly, this doesn't do that. So to the extent that the oversight mechanism puts in place one more bureaucratic layer, I mean, there are many layers here. It's not just 3 layers, right? If you unpack them, it's about 5 layers. But there's a chance that the court can take the view, if it sticks to that old view, that the internet doesn't permit this kind of executive committee deciding these kinds of content decisions. That's a possibility. And essentially the requirement that before you take down anything, there must be a judicial approach is a strong possibility in argument and conclusion.
Okay, I think there are many other questions that come out of that, but in the interest of moving things along, I want, and because we're covering such a wide spectrum, and I want to point it out to the audience, both who are here and watching the show later on, that we are tackling with a set of regulations that seek to regulate many areas under one heading. So we may not be able to cover all of that. I want to point out, I know I should have done this earlier, but in the middle of as I tried to grapple with the issues that each of the panelists have raised, I know that we won't be able to cover all of them. But Ragamalika, I want to come to you. You made, the comment that you made that, it's expensive to comply. That's the first point. But I want you to sort of explore that, take that a bit forward. I mean, forget about expense. Expense, of course, is a big thing. And we know that media across the world is struggling with figuring out a proper business model, right? But like for example, the news outlets like yours, right? You have a very niche geographical coverage in the sense that you try to cover the southern states in more detail. So, do these regulations essentially, in a way, will they kill sort of the diversity in our media in terms of smaller media houses focusing on issues that are more local in character or more regional in character or more in smaller geographies? I can think of, for example, many other media houses that focus on just a few cities or in languages. Does this challenge the very existence of those organizations, not from regulating content, but just the sheer nature of regulations? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, how do you feel as a journalist, and I want to ask the same question to Prakash later, that your content can just be taken down by someone? So I'll stop there with those 2 questions. The third one came to my mind, but I'll stop with 2 for the moment. Yeah.
Thanks, Harish. So regarding your first question, right? So when we talk about like smaller media organizations, of course, like media, especially digital media everywhere across the world after the pandemic, we are all struggling with revenue. We are all struggling with how are we going to survive? The questions of where is this revenue going to come from? We are not, I mean, like the News Minute and a lot of other digital news websites in India don't get the kind of like government advertising that a newspaper or a television channel would get, right? So our operations are much smaller, and it's much more difficult to like sort of make that kind of money. So in this situation, if you look at the new IT rules and the three-tier mechanism that they want to bring in, level 1, level 2, and level 3, and as Sudhir said, I mean, it's not just 3 layers, right? It's multiple layers if you look at it actually. Uh, so that basically says, I mean, in very simple terms, you have a portal. Somebody can come and say that I'm going to file a complaint against a particular story on this portal, right? So level 1 is inside the organization, we need to have a compliance officer. There is a cost involved to that, having a compliance officer. In a small organization, we have 40 people in total, looking at editorial, looking at reporting, editing, looking at marketing, everything together, right? So you're bringing in a compliance officer. Now this person has to be senior enough to sort of take these decisions on content. You'll need like legal advisors also sort of continuously on board to like look at these complaints and stuff like that. The second level then, they call it an independent media body. If it's so independent, then why does it have to have like an empaneled person from the government? The government is going to empanel certain people, certain high court judges, and like media personalities, whatever that means. And they say that, you know, these people need to be on this group. Then where is the question of independence at that second level, right? And then the third level, of course, is the ministry, in essence, saying I can take down anything that I want to. Now you're given like, you know, oh, within 15 days, you're supposed to reply to this. Within 15 days, you're supposed to reply to that. You're supposed to reply to every single comment that is coming. With the different sort of, I mean, if you look at the internet today, look at an IT cell of a party, right? Somebody is pissed off. Election season is on. Somebody is pissed off with like a story that we've done. What happens? They send a whole horde of trolls. So if I get like 1,500 complaints within a couple of hours about a particular story, and the organization is just left battling. The organization is just left battling, like, you know, what are we going to do with compliance, which means that, you know, I have to reply to this person, and that this person can still like take it to the next level, and then that story can just be taken off anyway, right? So just imagining that, and this is right now, even without these rules in play, if you see like, you know, some story is done and then an IT cell sort of comes after you on Twitter, that itself is like sort of traumatizing enough, right? You know, your journalism is correct, you know, you've done your due diligence, but somebody has taken offense, right? How do you reply to offense? How do you sort of logically debate with somebody has taken offense, right? So there, that sort of at the very first step, then organizations that are small, organizations that are sort of very you know, with using minimal resources, they're just like trying to put their journalism out there. You're going to think about, is it even worth doing a story? And that is a big loss to citizens. That is a big loss to leaders and viewers, right? If your organizations are going to, news organizations are going to think about whether doing a story can bring in these repercussions, so I should not even do that story, then your diversity, as you said, is gone at that first step itself, right? Your second question was, how do I feel about this as a journalist? As a journalist, I think it's ridiculous that we are in this situation where there isn't even a legislative process. Forget that, of course, today legislative process with the brute majority that we have just means that, you know, 100 people will scream, I, and then like, you know, you have a law that has been passed. But, you know, even that has not been followed, which print media and television does have, right? Like they have laws that were passed by Parliament. We have Article 19, which can be used if somebody does spread misinformation, which is not, again, in the ambit of this law. But if you are talking about like, you know, problematic stuff that is being published online, every news organization faces defamation cases. Every news organization faces like, you know, lawsuits already, right? So it's not like, you know, we're not like responsible or, you know, not doing things that we should be doing as journalism organizations. But suddenly now you've brought in these rules from the back door and clubbed us with somebody like a Twitter and a Facebook to say that, you know, anybody writes anything on Twitter is the same thing as somebody doing a piece of journalism on the News Minute or Scroll or Wire or wherever. And then, of course, the irony is that, you know, we have big media. We have your NDTV and Indian Express and all of these guys saying, oh, no, don't club us with them, right? We are the people who have the money. Don't club us with these guys who, you make these rules for them, the smaller players. We will continue to follow the rules the laws that were made in Parliament. We will continue to follow them. But these small players, you do whatever you want with them, right? So that is the situation that we're in, and it's sad.
Can I interrupt you with one question? So, I'm glad you brought the differentiation between, say, Twitter and what somebody says on Twitter as against what is, say, published on your, news website or, say some other, credible news organization website. Do you think a distinction needs to be made?
Absolutely. How can you club an intermediary? How can you say that an intermediary, that is Twitter, the company that is Twitter, right? What Twitter has to do for what is being said on their platform versus what a news media organization has to do. It's just like completely different beasts that you're talking about. And then you're clubbing OTT platforms as well over there. So you're talking about the effort that goes into like producing content. I mean, you're just seeing, okay, this is digital content. A tweet is not the same as a long form article, is not the same as a television series. I mean, a video series, right? I mean, they're different types of content.
Fair enough. I think you're distinguishing in terms of the intermediary and not just the way, the actual nature of producing the content. I think, but if you look at the actual nature of how the content is produced, there is a difference between what you do is sort of some form of curated content, whereas somebody just producing what we can call raw news. But we'll come back to that because I think that's an area that we need to explore. But coming back to Prakash, so as somebody who's been in theater, all your life, right? This freedom to think and produce what you want. And you made the point earlier that, restricting that is not a great idea. I think you made that very, very clear. But what, as Sudhir mentioned, and we discussed briefly earlier, that the internet and the digital media gives new channels of expressing your ideas or your creative, thinking, which was never existed earlier. Because if you take away, for example, the digital media, then you have to go to a publishing house or a theater house, and there is some sort of jumping through hoops and leaps and whatever, right? And however those structures are maybe imperfect, but there were some structures. But whereas the digital media gave a new form of medium to express your creative thing. Now, so if you look at it from a creative angle, this seems to be more threatening because you're essentially closing the door on anyone who may not be able to access more professional forms of communication. So how does that affect the sort of creative ability? I mean, you look like TikTok and all. There are so many stars, I'm told, which we don't know. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
See, you said what kind of content, when you were talking to Raghav Malika. So, but why is that content produced? That is the question. So when Sudhir says, what is the intent of the rules? That is the problem. The intent of the rules seemed very clear to me. Whoever politically opposes the government in power needs to be curbed. I mean, otherwise that's the elephant in the room. Really, come on. Yeah. That is all it is.
No, that's been the case with all regulations.
If I come and do
very clear about that, right?
Mimicry show that I'm doing Shankar Nag or I'm doing Rajesh Khanna or something, I don't think the government will come in the way. It comes in the way if you're going to
absolutely
hurt them in some way, correct?
Yeah.
So you should take away the power to regulate from government. This is how you will do it legally, you'll need to think. See, when the sedition law in India, you tell me, forget what the case laws have done after that. When the sedition law of India equates the government of the day with the nation, you should have seen that there was a problem already. It's because you've not seen there was a problem that we have come to this stage. See the rules under which some people have been arrested today, and the draconian nature of your NDMA. These laws were made by whom? You should have been careful when you do. You should not think you're always going to be in power. Somebody else will come and do something to you like that. I think, the Bombay High Court said you must strengthen the Broadcast Council of India. You give them autonomous powers. We had the, Press Council of India, a toothless, useless organization. You have the Broadcast Council, like it does what? And you ask a question like this. See, I'll tell you, I come from this entertainment world. I'll ask you a question. You tell me the justice of this. Some of you were watching till you came to watch OTT platforms and Netflix and Amazon Prime. You were watching some stuff on TV. Like some people watched Saas Bahu and we watched Nat Geo. But the thing is, you were watching stuff on TV. There was some kind of subscription model, but largely a advertising model dependent idea was there. It was okay. Now television works with big rules. I can't show smoking in a TV serial. I can't show drinking in a TV serial. Now you can have some very big foreign producer organization that can come and do any kind of show in India. That is not given to an Indian small entrepreneur. What is the justice of that? Where is the level playing field? So if you're demanded that TV should be freed, I would have accepted. See, when the Modi government came to power, I got a call from Delhi from somebody who said, can I join the censor board? I said, no, I will not join the National Censor Board. It's for two reasons. One is that it's not required. Please remove it. Movie people we will regulate ourselves. Empower us to do that. You don't do it for literature. You had not done it for internet for a long time. So you leave us alone. What was that Article 112A? That was struck down by the Supreme Court. That was there, correct? From time to time, somebody other is always trying this. So I'm saying, when she says, how will small producers survive in this kind of regime with strong intent, even if it's political intent, it should be allowed. Otherwise, what's the point? Now the government is thinking, why is Omidyar Foundation allowing funding these organizations? Actually, they are in the chart. They are the ones that are being targeted, in my opinion. Okay, it is the Omidyar Foundation organizations, including the News Minute and the independent and public-spirited media foundation that supports some of these. The Quint, the Quartz, the Caravan, like the Wire, the Scroll. They're foreign organizations that are working here and they don't have a subscription model. Now, what is the intent of these billionaire, like benefactors? The government is asking. We should say the Constitution allows them to do it and maybe stop at that. The last thing I want to say is this, there is a problem here if you do not encourage a strong subscription model. You should listen to the people. If you think you can offend them and get away with it, it's wrong. It's not my opinion, your opinion. Anybody's opinion is okay. Same it is. Everybody's got equal right to opinion. And fake news is a real problem sometimes. I was driving back from Mangalore one day, and I'll stop with this story. I like to tell stories. And on the way, every 3 a.m. in the morning, every clinic, hospital, a long queue of young mothers carrying babies and standing in a queue. Because I've got old journalist nature, I stopped and asked, what is the thing? One Kannada channel had said that the polio drops given were toxic and they'd been infected. And all night mothers stood in a queue. Is that okay? If people get offended, is that okay? If you don't give remedy, won't they feel like going and burning down that studio? You'll have to say that is okay then. See, a democracy means you need to take the pain of listening to people. The government should stop making these laws. It should stop giving awards for literature, awards for, movie, award for drama. It should stop this nonsense. There are a lot of work to do, which they don't do well. They should concentrate on that, I think.
I think,
Sorry,
spoken.
can I just come in? I just want to clarify before I forget, we are not funded by Omidyar. That would come under misinformation, disinformation, fake news.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry. Some other thing you're funded
Okay. Okay. Sudhir, I want to ask one last question to you before we take questions from the audience. I think that, again, I don't want to get sidetracked because there were lots of points that both Ragamalika and Prakash raised, and I think that is the challenge also with these regulations. We will find, even I know there are 3 petitions pending in the court as of this afternoon. You have a seeming attempt at stopping fake news, although we can question whether there is power to stop fake news. You have an effort to regulate intermediaries like, say, Twitter, WhatsApp, and others, and any other form of digital intermediaries. Then you have artists and content producers like Prakash and his fraternity, and then you have the news media. So broadly, you have, and I'm sure there are many other categories, but you have like four broad categories, and the 4th one being the news media, that like the News Minute and many others. Now, painting them with the same brush is a problem. That is clear. But just in terms of looking at state power and the boundaries this regulation seems to push in terms of regulating, how would you look at this kind of exercise of state power?
Arish, as you just said, a lot of people have said different things, and I've been thinking that I should.
It is too big, I know, but I think let's try to at least peel some layers of onion.
Some of them, yeah. I mean, the one thing I want to put away is that this is not about fake news, and because we should take that out. Because if anyone looks at Rule 4 and Rule 4B in particular, talks about a lot of things. Very concerned about pedophilia, and very concerned about copyright, but not one word about fake news and misinformation. So I think we should take that out, because that would be a very categorical misrepresentation of what we're dealing with.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We should take that out from the debate on this particular thing. But mine is overall. You must have a way to address it.
To address fake news. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So then maybe I'll start from that level, which is to say that there is some pressure on internet regulation generally. The good part about, if you go back to John Perry Barlow's manifesto for the internet and so on, the kind of premises are that anyone can get in, anyone can communicate to anyone else, lowest costs possible, right? This was the credo on which the internet was built. So all of that is under pressure here. So you're saying that, that was then, the 90s. We thought we had a model there, and we have big problems now. What are our problems? One problem seems to be the concentration of economic power on the internet. We can call this, as economists would call it, network effects and so on and so forth. Without being too technical, I won't go there. But I think I think that's globally recognized as a serious problem. Concentration. There's Australia, the US. I think the US is going to go through a phase of regulation on the internet, but the problem it's trying to tackle is concentration. Clearly, there is a problem about automated black box algorithms that are that disseminate content. And there might be a problem with misinformation and disinformation with respect to that. That people say silly things. They say silly things in real life, and they say silly things on the internet. But the problem is amplification, right? And so if we can tackle that problem of amplification, that would be a serious problem to tackle, and a tough problem. There are no easy answers there. But none of that is in this regulation, right? So, I mean, I think we should recognize what problems there are and what problems are here. And to think that this is anything about fair sharing of resources or thing is a mistake. This is something else. So we should take it for what it is. What is it then? And here you mentioned the 4 layers and so on and so forth. And really, what I think back to is that, you know, suddenly newspapers are going to be happy. I'm talking about print newspapers. They're saying, look, we thought we were overregulated. Look at this. If you want a recipe to kill an industry, this is it. This is what we did in the 1950s. And I don't mean to media. We did this across the board. This was what Jagdish Bhagwati in a fantastic paper calls the Nehruvian dirigist economy. Right? This is dirigist regulation. This is how you kill spaces. So I think that before we can, and Prakash, you said that we all have different moral intuitions and political preferences, and that's all right. We can take different views on which party does better and does worse, but hopefully we can take common views on things like this. You know, that look, we have learned something from our own history across 30 years in between the 50s and the 80s. We should take our own history seriously, not someone else's history. Let's take our own history seriously. And what we learn is this kind of dirigist regulation doesn't work. It makes some politicians happy, maybe at some point in time, and some bureaucrats happy at other points in time. It doesn't do anything for the public at large or for the productive sectors of the economy. But what I think, and you mentioned the NDMA, right? And I just want to refer to that. The National Disaster Management Act was the rubric around which the pandemic response was structured. And what's very interesting about the NDMA is that it's 1950s style legislation. Government knows best. Give whatever level of government, down to the local health officer, absolute powers, and good things will come. And whatever else we can say about India's pandemic response, we know that it was just a turn back to the old state. There's no new state there. And I suppose that what has happened is that, I really want to pay attention to that, is that loss of imagination that some other model is possible here. And that was the sliver of opportunity of the 90s, right? And suddenly in 2020, we're back to old ideas. We're back to old models. Yes, political parties may have changed, but old ideas are back in fashion. We think this is the way to run the state, and we have the most remarkable regulatory apparatus being set up, which we simply haven't seen for the better part of 3 decades at least.
Yeah, I think I just want to make one comment before taking some questions. In some other context, I think maybe in the beginning of the pandemic, I think I was talking to another lawyer friend, and we said how quickly a public health crisis or a public health issue has been converted into a law and order issue, right? And then we were exploring, is this because the Indian state, irrespective of political party and the color of the Indian state at any given point of time, is very comfortable with dealing with law and order issues, so-called, because it essentially concentrates power into itself and thinks I know best, and therefore convert everything into a law and order issue. And one of the things I noticed about the regulations, and I was reading it in detail, is the mention of this traces of law and order. I think if you're a lawyer reading it from a rights perspective, you will see law and order all over this set of regulation. And there, I think.
Sorry, I just want to agree.
Yeah.
We had a rule in Bangalore that when we had to produce a play on stage, and I'm talking about amateur theater, like 200 people, 100 people in the hall will watch. We had to take the script and give a copy of it to the commissioner of police. This was not during the emergency. This was still very recently. We had to give it to the commissioner of police. He had to approve it. And then only we could stage it. Because if the government feels comfortable with enforcement, nobody seemed to mind that. And the person who removed that was actually Yediyurappa. So how strange it is.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, I think, as I said, we have a huge canvas in respect to these regulations. I think we have just touched the surface on some broad issues. Let's take, what I will do is I'll take only 3 questions first. My request is come directly to the question. No long-winded comments, please, just questions directly. I'll take 3 questions. I see a hand there, the lady there, yes. Oh, sorry. Please come to the mic. Yes, yes, ma'am. You first. While she's walking there, can I see some more hands so I can identify the next 2 questions and then, okay, the gentleman here, second question. Anyone else? Okay, 3rd question, and we will stop there. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Smita. Thanks for this discussion that I spontaneously walked into. My question to all 3 of the panelists is, should everyone have an opinion? Is everyone entitled to an opinion? And remember that when we talk about opinions, that includes my neighbor who shouldn't be allowed to comment on how I dress. Also, a minister who shouldn't be allowed to comment on TV series. So should everyone have an opinion? And this is, I think, a discussion that will continue for years to come.
Okay, thank you. We will come back. We'll take all the 3 questions and then we'll come. Yes, sir, please.
So my question is specifically to Sudhir. You had conflated the direction in which India is traveling on these laws to the way we were in the 50s, the dirigist economy. But there's another way of looking at it, and to me it seems pretty clear that the model they're following is not the 50s Indian economy, but what in some senses government sees as the successful Chinese model for control. So wouldn't that be a far better lens to look at it? Because a lot of the things that are being done seems to sort of say, okay, this worked there, and why don't we head in this direction? And that seems to be a lens that really works in terms of looking at it.
Yeah, the next question.
My question is, why do you think the government, whoever is in power of that matter, has such a mistrust in its own citizens, and they don't trust the citizens to do the right thing? There may have been instances where some people have done wrong willfully, but to paint all citizens with the same brush and saying, because of this mistake, we are regulating everything. Why do you think every government does such a thing? Second question is, what is the opposition really doing in this matter? I know that the government right now has a brute majority, but even with the number of MPs that they have in the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, they can still make this a huge issue. They're doing so with farm laws, which is not working clearly for them. But why is the opposition so silent on this aspect?
Okay, we got the question.
Yeah.
Thank you. So who wants to start? Ragamalika, do you want to go? You can choose any. I think one question was directed directly to Sudhir, but you can pick any of the other 2, and then I'll come to Prakash.
Right. I mean, why does the government want to regulate? I think that's the nature of governments everywhere. And it's in the nature of citizens. It should be the nature of media and citizens to sort of question that. Why should the government be regulating everything? So the question, as Prakash was talking about earlier, should not be, why didn't you speak up when there were regulations for theater, or why didn't you speak up when there were regulations for TV? I believe that we should speak up now against every silly or ridiculous regulation that exists. And it's not about one party. It's about the very fact that there is a government that is elected by us, and who is trying to sort of, I mean, I would use the word censorship, who is trying to censor us right now. And that is not good for media organizations or companies, and it's not good for citizens also. So that is my answer to that. And the other question on should everyone have an opinion? Yes, everyone should have an opinion. Whether your opinion is that people should not wear torn jeans or whatever your opinion is, you're entitled to it. You're also absolutely accountable. I mean, you should be held accountable for your opinion if you're in public office, right? Or if you're in a position of power and somebody is questioning you, yeah, you should be held accountable for that as well. And if the opinion is fake news, if the opinion is hate speech, if the opinion is sort of driving hate towards somebody, that is not an opinion. That goes into some other category altogether. That's just hatred. That's vile violence, right? So there's a difference, is what I would say. Yeah.
Prakash?
You know, I completely agree with Raga Malik. She's right. You know, why shouldn't we discuss the whole gamut of laws on regulating media and content? We should discuss. This is an opportunity. We should say, we can create a discourse around it. It'll be very great. But I'm struck by what one of you said. You know, like, why is there so much distrust in the citizens? You know, we can regulate ourselves, perhaps. We need this urge to centralize, this tendency to create everything, to create all decision-making power only at one place, which is not just a geographic location. It's something, you know, in your head too. You decentralize, and that means at various levels too. You allow newspaper organizations to frame their laws and create some kind of an ombudsman mechanism to, if somebody has grievances, and take it seriously, empower those bodies. Nothing will be perfect in a democracy, but how can we say that we can trust our governments and our politicians more than our people, you know? I think, you know, elders of society, people who are achievers in various, you know, fields, in industry, in business, in commerce, in entertainment, in media, let them create regulating bodies and let them make these decisions, and you put them to judicial scrutiny. And if it becomes such a problem, if it genuinely becomes a law and order issue, I'm sure the public will sympathize with you. You know, otherwise, I think you stay out of this otherwise. I mean, I would say government, there is too much government. It's a betrayal of what was promised to us.
Yeah, just to ask Prakash, I mean, because it is in a way, and I'll ask the same question to Sudhir and maybe come back to Ragamalika on the comparison with China. I think it was an interesting comparison. But I'm on a different point. The government, and particularly the Prime Minister, keeps talking about the need for less government and the ease of doing business. But this one, I mean, even if you look at it from a business perspective, I mean, this is hardly that. I mean, this goes like, you know, much beyond, you know, what. So when you're talking about receding governmental powers in certain areas for certain kinds of economic activities, it seems to be a different approach to certain other things. But having said that, I mean, I thought it's interesting to ask you as a theatre person, because I believe that, and Sudhir made this point already, so we don't need to belabor that. Every party is with the same color. Maybe so. My reaction to the opposition parties is, I think they all like this kind of power. They want to regulate too. So let's be very clear. Maybe they'll oppose it now, but they want to regulate too. I wouldn't have been surprised. Every party has done it. I wouldn't have been surprised. Has done it. Ramakrishna Hegde has done it. Rajiv Gandhi has done it. Every political party likes to control information. I think that is very, very clear across the world. I think there are very few exceptions. Some countries are lucky, like the US, where press freedom is mentioned in their constitution itself. You know, others, even, you know, somebody like a place like the United Kingdom, where there's a lot of free press, they also don't have that kind of freedom as in the US. So this is a challenge across parties. So I think that probably answers that. But anything else to add, Prakash, before I go to Sudhir? Or
no, the one thing, there was a great quote that somebody made, that is sponsorship better than censorship? See, these are deeper questions, I think. It's not something you can fix with legislation. I think we need to mature into a more serious discourse on this. Otherwise, we'll just take simplistic positions,
Sudhir, the China question first, because that's the one that's not been answered, and then
I'll
China
just
comparison rather.
briefly go to the facts, the opinion question. I think it's important, and I think Ragmalika responded, but I want to respond differently. You are entitled to your own opinions, as the old saying goes, but not entitled to your own facts. And now that seems quaint and old worldly to say, but I want to say it. That this idea that everything is fair game and anyone can say anything and it's everything is an opinion is a dangerous place to be. We've learned this in big events around the world, including in this country, and it would be a category mistake to go in that direction. Does everyone get to express their opinions? Of course, everyone gets to express their opinions. It may be distasteful, but if it's illegal, you should have a state that has the ability to enforce it. But that takes me to the third question. States that have weak rule of law states and low trust societies have a very strong speech regulation. This question about, why do you over police? The question is that the state doesn't have the ability to police wrongful speech acts. So what it does is everything becomes a law and order problem. They have no ability to control the speech discourse. So law and order responses become the stock, and India is in that position. And hence this question about why they regulate. They regulate also because thousands of people gather on the streets, like hundreds of mothers gathering outside a hospital. We know this to be true, so we can't wish it away. So weak rule of law states ironically show this kind of behavior, overzealous speech regulation. Is China the better comparison, or is 1950s India the better comparison? So I would have gone with China if I saw that the Indian state was reworking the root architecture of the internet. I see no evidence of that. Now, if there's a secret plan that and I don't know, I'm willing to revise my opinion. But as far as I can tell, the root architecture of the internet in India is not being restructured. So there's no splinter net, as the Economist called it, I think, a fortnight ago. So the Chinese model is altogether more aggressive and far more fundamental. The layer of regulation is not the soft content layer. The layer of regulation is the core of the internet. So that is a different model. So I would not suggest that we're not there yet, unless I don't know something that I should know. On opposition response, one thing I want to put some distance, Prakash. I would not be, I think it's a false equivalence to say all parties are the same. They're not the same. And some parties have particular views on state and society and the economy, and other parties have different views. And we should hold that.
But on the one line clarification, it's not parties. It's just one person in every party. Okay.
But I will come with you on the point that the real test for parties is unpopular and distasteful speech, right? And we don't have a single party in this country that is willing to say, this is distasteful speech, I absolutely abhor it, but let it pass. That maturity is not there in our political spectrum. It's not there in a regional party. It's not there in the many splintered parties we have along community lines and so on. It's not there in the national parties. We're not there yet. I think that equivalence I'm willing to go with. But I would not go with the idea that all parties regulate the same, because it was only one party that brought us the 90s. And I'm willing to stick my neck out on that. And I know that there are people who would want to say that, look, every party is a liberal party. I think we just have to be a little more attentive to the historical facts on that.
So I think maybe the other way of looking at it, I agree with Sudhir that every party is not the same. I mean, clearly there's no doubt about it. But I think if you look at the way different parties in India have acted against free speech when they have been in power, I think there is a remarkable, consistency, right? Nobody likes free speach. I think that is.
We don't have a free speech party.
Yeah,
I think that we agree
that
about.
we all agree. But I think the point also, and I want to answer that, I think, because Ragamalika also made this point about how these rules have not been debated in the legislature. So maybe if there was a debate, we would have known where the opposition parties actually stood. Because it's one thing to say something outside Parliament, but it's another thing to say, the same thing inside Parliament. So we don't really know their views on this particular set of regulations. So give them the benefit of doubt for the moment. Okay. I think we could go on and on, but as all good things, we have to come to a close. So we will stop here. But I'm sure all the panelists would be interested in hearing more views. So please do reach out to either the Daksh team or the BIC team if you have any particular questions, and we can continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Prakash, Sudhir, Ragamalika, for being here. I'm sure we will hear more about these regulations in the days to come. And perhaps we need to have at least one or two more sessions. I'm looking at the Daksh Marga team to try and organize a few more events, because clearly we have not done justice to the entire spectrum of the issues under the OTT regulations. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Harish.